My name is Jennifer Zeitzer, and I am the Director of Legislative Relations at the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, and I thank you again for joining us. We will divide today's presentation into three different parts that will provide some basic information about FASEB for those of you who don't know us or have not participated in our previous webinars. We'll explain why we're hosting this particular webinar today. We will also give you a look at new resources that are available from FASEB to help individuals engage in advocacy activities in support of increased federal funding for biomedical and physical sciences research. And we're also going to share with you FASEB's best tips and guidelines for individual action steps that you can take to become an advocate. These tips have been honed over the last couple of years with a lot of help from FASEB board members and leadership who've been engaged in advocacy. For those of you who are not familiar, FASEB is the largest coalition of biomedical researchers, and we represent 27 different scientific societies, which include more than 120,000 researchers from the U.S. and around the world. FASEB's strength really is in its member societies, and we could not exist without them. We have become a recognized voice in the policy world, speaking out on behalf of biological and biomedical researchers. And some of you who are participating in today's webinar may already be a member of a FASEB society. We thank you for your membership, and for those who are not, you may want to consider joining a society or societies that represent your individual scientific disciplines. FASEB's work is really focused on advancing health and welfare by promoting progress and education in biological and biomedical sciences. We are an organization that Capitol Hill and the federal government turn to, the media as well, for information on policies related to biomedical science and engineering. At FASEB, our policy development process begins with collaborating with scientists who are currently working in their fields and represent their member societies. We are able to reflect a broad cross-section of the research community because we have 120,000 members. We have a full-time presence in Washington, D.C., where we keep on top of the latest legislative and regulatory developments, news, and other events affecting scientists. And we try and share this information with the scientific community at large. We have a combination of volunteer action and staff work that ensures that our advocacy efforts are designed to be as effective as possible. And we do try and work collaboratively with non-FASEB societies as well, with others in the biomedical research community, including universities and private research institutions. We're reaching out to you today for a number of reasons. You may recall that this time last year, the federal government actually shut down because Congress had not yet passed a budget. I'm thankful to report that today the government is operating, even though Congress has again not passed a budget. Unfortunately, federal agencies, including NIH, are operating under a temporary budget agreement known as a continuing resolution. You may have heard it referred to as a CR. The current CR is in effect until December 11th, 2014. Congress is currently in recess, and nearly all legislators are either in their home state or district or campaigning for the election that will take place on November 4th. Because Congress has not finished any of its work, including that on the budget, there will be what's called a lame duck session that will begin on November 12th. It is likely that this lame duck session will probably last sometime until December, maybe even into Christmas. One of the things that Congress can, and we think should, do during the lame duck session is pass the final 2015 federal budget. But it is going to take a lot of public pressure to convince Congress to do this. Yes, it is their job, but as you may have realized, Congress has gotten very good lately at postponing action on major federal legislation and kicking the can down the road. The limited amount of time between Election Day and Christmas will make it that much harder to get anything done later this year. But NIH and the other science agencies need Congress to pass the final 2015 budget for two very important reasons. The first reason is that over the summer, Congress actually made some progress on the individual appropriations bills that make up the total federal budget. Funding increases were proposed for the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy Office of Science, and the research agencies at the Veterans Administration and the Department of Agriculture. In a minute, I will talk to you about these funding increases. but I will say that any increase is helpful in the current fiscal environment. The second reason we need Congress to pass a budget is that without a final budget, NIH and the other science agencies cannot start new projects. They will have to be very conservative in how they spend their existing dollars, and they may not be able to make decisions about pending grants. This will happen the longer Congress does not pass a budget. So it's really important that we remind members of Congress about why federal science funding is so important to their districts, their states, and more importantly, their own constituents. FASEB has developed a number of new resources to provide this information, and that's what we're going to talk about next. As I mentioned a minute ago, funding increases were proposed for the federal science agencies. The amounts presented here, as you can see, are very modest, but again, important in light of all the recent budget cuts. And I did want to point out that the Senate's recommendation for NIH of $30.4 billion would actually fully restore the funding that was cut in 2013 due to sequestration. It's better late than never is the best thing I can say, but it is important that we try and get this funding for the Senate. The House has not made a recommendation yet. The other agencies also are slated for modest increases, and we're pleased to see that. And I will say that these increases are a result of previous advocacy to explain why funding and steady funding for the science agencies is so important. So we need to keep up the work that we've already been doing. A few weeks ago, FASEB launched a brand new advocacy tools website. This was developed after months and months of work where we solicited a lot of feedback from members of FASEB societies, our own board of directors, and then others about the kinds of materials that would be helpful for people in the research community to use when they engage in advocacy. These are really specifically designed to help scientists, lab techs, postdocs, principal investigators, almost anyone from the scientific community who wants to engage more in advocacy. Based on the feedback that we did collect, we decided to create a website that was really designed to be a one-stop shop so that you would not have to click on many pages or go through a lot of materials to find what you needed. We also arranged the new website kind of under 4 key actions that we thought would be helpful in the current environment. The first was encouraging individuals to meet with their members of Congress or congressional staff, either in Washington, D.C. if they have that opportunity, or actually more importantly at home in their states and districts. We also wanted to help get folks to local events hosted by members of Congress. Because it is an election year, you should actually see your member of Congress and those running for office more frequently over the next couple of weeks. In addition, Twitter has become an interesting and creative and exciting new way to communicate with elected officials, and we wanted to provide resources to help you do that. And then finally, getting the word out to the general public. One thing that we do know is that advocacy in numbers is really helpful, so the more people we have engaged, the better. And we hope that once you engage in advocacy, you might consider asking your friends, neighbors, colleagues, etc. to join you. I did want to mention that we will continue to add new resources to this website, so please let us know if there's something that you need that isn't already there, or you have any suggestions about other tools that might be available. One of the newest tools that we're very excited about is our district fact sheets. These highlight federal research funding in nearly 400 congressional districts, Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. There are actually 435 congressional districts, but there are a few where there are just no federal dollars. Each district fact sheet is only 1 page and presents the number of institutions receiving funding, the total amount of funding each institution receives, and then the number of grants each institution receives from NIH, NSF, the Department of Energy, and the USDA, or United States Department of Agricultural Research Programs. These fact sheets are a pretty unique resource that demonstrate the direct impact of the federal research dollars in each district. And we believe that they will be a great tool for those members of Congress who want to know why they should be concerned about the budget for the federal science agencies and what it means to them personally. We have taken care to include a footnote at the bottom of each fact sheet to let you know where this data comes from so that anyone can look it up and double check it. One thing that I did want to point out is that these days districts often overlap in terms of boundaries, particularly if you're from a large research institution that may have buildings spread out across a number of miles. So when you look at the district fact sheet for your specific congressional district, you might also look at the ones in your surrounding area because they may be applicable as well. And each fact sheet is designed to be, not only visually pleasing, but easily printed out from our website that you can share or tweet or send via email. All of the fact sheets are on the website that is noted on the right-hand side of this slide. When you click on each state, you will get not only a state fact sheet, but you will also get the ones for each district. If you do not see your district listed, it is because there is no federal research funding in there. But again, I do encourage you to look at a neighboring district because sometimes the university may be in one town but serve constituents and employ people from a broad area. We have also put together some other pieces of information and documents that we think will be helpful to help you prepare for a meeting with a member of Congress or their aide, or even an informal discussion if you happen to see them on the campaign trail. On the left-hand side of this slide, we have a document that's called Talking Points. This is really a step-by-step guide for what you should say in a meeting with a member of Congress or their aides. This will really help you organize your thoughts and the key messages that you might want to deliver in such a meeting. We have designed it, again, to be very simple so that you can just jot down some talking points or notes. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have organized what we call our Legislative Visit Best Practices Guide. And this really offers hints and tips that we have collected from others and other scientists who have participated in a meeting with their member of Congress or been to a Capitol Hill Day over the last couple of years. These tips have been developed from real-life experiences, so we hope that they provide an extra level of resource for you as you consider engaging in advocacy activities. One hint that we want to provide is that if you'd like to print out this document, please click on the yellow Download PDF button so that the document prints correctly. As I mentioned earlier, Twitter has become an interesting and unique and I think very good way to communicate with members of Congress and their staff. We've noticed that in the last couple of years, nearly all members of Congress, and that includes Senate and House, are now on Twitter, and it is quickly becoming a critical form of communication between elected officials and their constituents. Some members of Congress send their own tweets, others typically let their staff do it, and it really doesn't matter. Reaching out to your member of Congress on Twitter still gets your viewpoint across to them and is counted as an important form of communication. While there are many guides on Twitter or on the web about how to use Twitter, we tried to put together a short one to help you connect with your members of Congress in a couple of key steps. But I really do encourage you to not only connect with your members of Congress on Twitter by following them and retweeting them, but also kind of creating your own profile. It has been very interesting to watch how many members of Congress now are announcing their position on key issues via Twitter. They're talking about what they're doing at home, local events, whether or not they visited a research university. They're tweeting about this. They're not sending out press releases. You may not see anything about their activities on their website. So Twitter has become a great way to keep track of your members of Congress almost in real time. Meeting with your members of Congress is definitely one key activity that we encourage folks to do. I will be honest and say this one is the one that takes a lot of work to get a meeting. What we have tried to do with this particular section of the website is break it down into 4 steps that you can follow that will hopefully create a successful meeting with your member of Congress, again, either in Washington or at home. First and foremost, the best way to get a meeting with your member of Congress is to submit a request in writing. Almost all congressional offices now will not entertain any requests that don't come in through writing. Some members of Congress have a form on their website where you can quickly submit a request. I encourage you to use that. That is a great way to request it. Others don't have a formal process. The best way to find out what process your member of Congress uses is literally to go to their website or their Twitter. For those members of Congress who don't have a form on their website and request a formal letter, we've actually put together a sample that you can use. It's really simple. It's very short. It is literally fill in the blank. And you can find that letter under step number 1, how to request a meeting. The second thing that you will want to do as you're waiting to hear whether or not your meeting request has been granted, is to start practicing what you might say in that meeting, what issues you will talk about, what questions you will raise. The third step, as you think about preparation, is to, again, look at our Legislative Visits Best Practice Guide to learn how you can make a good impression and how to deal with difficult questions you may receive. And last but not least, and this is probably the most important step, is the follow-up. You will need to follow up in order to get the meeting, and you will need the follow-up afterwards. And a very basic step that you can take after a meeting with a member of Congress or their staff is to send a thank you email. All congressional mail is still being screened as a result of security concerns that arise after 9/11. So sending a hard copy letter to your member of Congress is not a good way to reach them. So we do encourage a quick email message to the member of Congress you met with or even their staff aide to say thank you. The other trick about sending the thank you email is to provide them with any resources that you may have shared in hard copy format. You can send electronic versions, or to remind them of questions that you asked or information that you're waiting to receive from them. And we have also put together a very short template thank you email that you can copy and paste and just fill in the blank to use. As I noted, planning a meeting with a member of Congress and getting one is going to take a little bit of work. And so we have developed over the last couple of years some tips and strategies that we hope will make the process easier for you and result in better success. The first thing that you're going to want to do is identify who will attend the meeting. One tip that you might consider is bringing a patient or a research volunteer that you may have worked with in your lab, if that's something that you have access to. If you're a postdoc, consider bringing another postdoc with you, or perhaps an undergraduate student who may be working or volunteering in your lab. And of course, always think about who else from your institution who might be willing to go on a meeting with you. The next step, or another strategy that's really important, is to determine when and where the meeting will take place. As I've noted a couple of times, meeting with a member of Congress at home is often a more pleasant experience. When members are home, they sometimes have more time for meetings with their constituents. They may be in a more relaxed mood, and they actually may be reserving whole days or hours of their day to do these kinds of meetings. When they're in Washington, the demands on their time are epic. They have hearings to go to, press conferences, and that kind of thing. So most people do not actually get to see their member of Congress in Washington. One thing to keep in mind, the congressional schedule is such that almost all members of Congress are home in their state or district office on Mondays and Fridays. So that is an excellent time to request a meeting. Other times that it's easier to meet with a member of Congress at home is during a congressional recess. And you can easily find out the congressional calendar by going to house.gov or senate.gov. And we will also provide a congressional calendar on the Advocacy Tools website. We need to add that. Once you've determined when and where the meeting will take place, you will need a really good plan to follow up on the meeting request. In my experience, it takes at least 2, 3, sometimes even 4 follow-up requests once you've submitted a request for a meeting with a member of Congress. So patience is a virtue, as is persistence. It's much easier to be persistent if you keep really good records of any emails or phone calls you make to call and check on the status of your meeting request. It can be frustrating to wait sometimes for days or weeks at a time, but please keep at it. I think once you submit the request and you make a connection with the scheduler or someone from the member of Congress's office, it is easier to follow up as long as you keep records of your emails and phone calls and you can reference them. You also want to prepare for the meeting. It is really critical that you take some time to research your member of Congress's position on research funding. Even if you think you know what that is because you have a relationship with that office or you've been following your member of Congress for a number of years. Check their website, Twitter, and Facebook to find out what they're thinking these days on key issues. One tip that you may realize is if you go to your member of Congress's website, their Twitter feed, and their Facebook, and you see nothing about NIH or research funding or science, that's a hint that you have a lot of work to do to educate your member of Congress about why these issues are important not only to you but to their district. It's also important that you bring materials from your institution, city, or state in addition to the FASEB fact sheets. If you have a one-page fact sheet about your particular area of research, go ahead and bring that. If you have a document that talks about the number of jobs your research institution provides in the local area, certainly bring that as well. And you may have to create some materials too. When you do create materials to bring, or you bring materials, please keep them short. Most aides and members of Congress will not take time to read a 25-page research paper, but if you've published something in a journal that you're very proud of, or that represents a key area of research, try and summarize the findings of that paper in 3 or 4 sentences that you can put together in one paragraph. Things that include infographics are another great thing to bring to a member of Congress. Anything that is visually pleasing and can be presented in 1 to 2 pages is really the best thing you can do. Attending town hall meetings and other local events, certainly another way to introduce yourself to your members of Congress and their staff. Because it is an election year, I anticipate that there will be more opportunities to meet your member of Congress at home or their staff. Town hall meetings are certainly one thing. We've noticed that office hours are another, that sometimes a member of Congress will advertise that their local office in your town is having what they call office hours, where they'll be open from, let's say, 9 to noon, where you can just come in and speak informally with your member of Congress and or their staff aides. Others will be traveling around their districts with what they call a mobile office, which is sometimes a van. We encourage you to show up at those events too, because it is an opportunity to interact with these folks. How you find out when these events are happening, it is difficult to do that. Our best tip is to look for announcements on Twitter or Facebook or in the local newspapers. Many members of Congress do not announce their public events very much in advance. Sometimes they provide us a little 24 hours notice. That is challenging, of course, for anybody who has a tight schedule, but I do encourage folks to keep a very close eye on your member of Congress's Twitter and Facebook feed, because more often than not, if they're going to have a public event, they will announce it on Twitter. Anytime you go to a local event, whether it's a town hall meeting or office hours or even a community meet and greet, I encourage you to write down 1 or 2 questions before the event so that you can have your thoughts in order if you get a few minutes or a few seconds to speak with a member of Congress or their staff. When you put together your questions, avoid any that can prompt yes or no answers. So for example, do not ask your member of Congress, do you support increasing funding for research? And the reason I do not recommend this kind of question is because it's too easy for the person to either say yes or no. Sometimes they say yes and they move on to the next question, and you haven't really gotten a lot of helpful information. Other times they say yes and then they either don't address the question or they go on to a different topic. So a better way of phrasing that question is, where does funding for research fit on your list of priorities? You want to give them a question that they really have to at least try and answer with something other than a yes or no. What that will do sometimes is often solicit from them a longer answer to a question. If you go to any local event and there's a sign-in sheet, by all means put your name and email address down on there. Most likely what will happen is you will start receiving a lot of emails from your member of Congress, to which you can unsubscribe if you don't want to get them. But it's a way to indicate that your presence was at the meeting. And be sure to introduce yourself to any of the staff. If you're at a local event, most staff will be identified by either a name badge or some kind of name tag that says that they are staff for the member of Congress. And like church, you'll get more out of it if you sit in the front pew. So if you're at a town hall meeting and it's very crowded and there are lots of people there, I encourage you to sit up front. It's much easier to get recognized during Q&A time if you sit in front. If the meeting structure is such that they have microphones set up either on an aisle or in a sort of one space, sit closest to the microphone so that you can be one of the first people there to answer a question. In some cases, members of Congress don't have a lot of time for these events and will have to cut off questions before everybody has had a chance to answer. So try and sit near the microphone if the setup and the format looks like that. And then last but not least, submitting a letter to the editor, or LTE as we like to call them, or an op-ed is a great way to get your viewpoint across. With an increase in online versions of newspapers, editors are looking for more content these days. So even if you don't get something in the print version of your local newspaper, or you live in a town that no longer has a daily print version of the newspaper, consider submitting something online. It's still a great way to get an important issue in front of the readership in your hometown. The best way to get something published is to carefully read any instructions on the local newspaper's website for how to submit a letter to the editor or op-ed. Some papers won't accept unsolicited pieces of information. Others have a very strict format. Whatever you do, if it's noted, pay close attention to a word limit. One way to make sure you don't get your letter published is to submit something that exceeds the limit on the word limit and would require a lot of editing by the editorial staff. So keep it short. If there is no guideline for your local paper, we recommend something no more than 250 words. If your letter is published either on the print version of your newspaper or online, be sure to send it to your members of Congress in an email or tweet it to them. You can send an electronic link or even make a PDF of a copy. If you're not sure how to begin writing a letter, we actually do have some sample letters that are on our website under the Get the Word Out tab. We have the guidelines and tips, but one thing I will say is that of the sample letters that we have on our website, please do not copy them verbatim. Newspapers have very strict rules on what they will accept. They're looking for original content. They're not looking for anything that may have already been submitted by someone else. And be sure when you submit something to your local newspaper to include your full contact information, name, snail mail address, and a phone number where they can reach you. Because the first thing that they will do if they even consider publishing your piece is verify that you are a resident of that local town or city. And then last but not least, as I wrap up my part of the presentation, we wanted to share with you some other tools to help you stay engaged. We have a FASEB mobile app that is available in the Apple Store or Google Play. This will also provide you with access to our advocacy resources. One tip, there's a congressional directory on the FASEB app, so if you're not sure how to reach a member of Congress or even who your member of Congress is, you can just go onto our app and just find that information on your smartphone. If you don't already receive the FASEB e-action alerts, we encourage you to go to that link and sign up. A couple of times a year, we will send you a short email message and say, we need you to contact your member of Congress right now because they're getting ready to vote on the budget or there's an important bill you need to know about. We will not spam you with this information, and you will not receive something every month, only when we really need you to get engaged. And then also, we have a biweekly OPA, or Office of Public Affairs, what we call Washington Update. We have converted this to more of a blog-style format. This includes lots of information about what's happening in Washington and in Congress that impacts the research community. And then last but not least, again, if you don't already do so, please follow us on Twitter. We're at FASEB OPA. Oftentimes we will announce breaking news or important information on Twitter first before it goes on our website. And if you're so inclined, become a fan of our Facebook page. We keep the Facebook page updated with new information as well. Finally, just a quick reminder about how to ask a question. Please go ahead and you can send them in now. We've gotten a number of questions that have come in as I've been speaking. And we will have about 30 more minutes for Q&A. So I will start now with the first round of questions. And I'm going to repeat the question because I don't believe that you can all see them. Okay. Here's an interesting question. A friend of mine recently participated in a Hill Day program that was hosted by the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. She was able to meet her senator who was very supportive in person about increasing research funding. But after the meeting, the advocate looked at the senator's voting record and noticed that the record was very contrary to what had been stated verbally in the meeting. Is it appropriate to call voting records to question? I actually believe it is appropriate to call voting records to question. One of the things about being a good advocate is making sure that your member of Congress or your elected official truly understands the importance of research funding. Most of the time when you go to Capitol Hill or you meet with your member of Congress, they will say wonderful things about NIH and how much they support it. But sometimes you then look into their voting record. So if you notice that the voting record is contrary to what you've been told in a meeting, either with a member of Congress or their staff, it is appropriate to go back to them politely and point that out and say, I've noticed an inconsistency, or you voted, Senator Smith, you voted against a bill that would have provided a 10% increase in NIH funding. I would like to know why you voted this way, and if so, what could I tell you that might change your mind? So you can do this in a polite way by pointing it out. Give them a chance to explain why they voted a particular way. And it's also fine to push back a little bit if you get an answer that you find to be personally unsatisfactory. For example, the member of Congress may say, well, I voted against that funding increase for NIH because it was part of a larger bill that supported programs that I don't support or that I'm very much against. In which case you can then reply back to them, well, I understand that this was still a bill that would have provided an important increase for NIH, and I hope that in the future, if a similar vote comes up, you will change your mind. Another question that came up earlier in the presentation was, this is an election year, and I'm not sure that any member of Congress cares about anything other than getting my vote to be reelected. Is it really important to advocate now, or should we wait until next year when the new Congress is seated? I think that's also a good thing to think about in this time. It is true that members of Congress are home right now looking, for votes. They're on the campaign trail. But as I mentioned earlier, there will be this lame duck session starting in November. Even a member of Congress who may lose re-election on November 4th or may have already announced that he or she is retiring still will be coming back to Washington for a couple of weeks beginning in mid-November. They have important work to do. They cannot just go home and kick everything into next year. As I mentioned, the budget is one of those really, really important things. So it is critical now that when you get a chance, or if you get a chance to see a member of Congress, whether it's in a formal meeting or on the campaign trail or at your local Target, to talk to them about the importance of coming back to Washington and passing the budget. And again, explain what it means when NIH does not have their budget. If you have submitted a grant recently and you have not heard yet about the status of your grant, the chances of you getting an answer anytime soon, if Congress is on a continuing resolution well into next year, are very slim. And you may need to explain to your elected official or their staff that researchers plan far in advance for the research that they're going to do. There's years of data collection involved. Delays in funding often slow down critical research. I think Ebola is an example. Dr. Collins testified before Congress, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, on a hearing about the Ebola crisis, and was asked by a member of Congress, why don't we yet have an Ebola vaccine? And he did say that part of the reason is budget cuts at NIH and the fact that NIH has operated under continuing resolutions for the last couple of years have made it very hard to plan research. Another question, thanks so much for this information. Could you please let us know about any career opportunities in this emerging field? Absolutely, we would love to provide you with career opportunities. I will mention that one of the best ways to think about a career in science policy or in advocacy is to consider doing some kind of a fellowship. And the good news is there's lots of opportunities now to do these kinds of fellowships. A number of FASEB member societies, including ASBMB, offer a policy fellowship designed specifically for scientists. They offer stipends and an opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. and work in an office that does science policy and advocacy. So if you go to asbmb.org, you can find their information. We can also post on the FASEB website in the advocacy tools section some other resources. For example, the American Association for the Advancement of Science offers an advocacy website. Science Policy Fellowships. And if you Google Science Policy Fellowship, you can probably find other opportunities as well. Some people also offer short-term fellowships where you can come to Washington for, let's say, a week or a month. And those may be a better option for those of you who are in the middle of, let's say, a PhD program or a postdoc for which you're already committed. Someone is asking, if I encounter a stumbling block in getting a meeting with a member of Congress or submitting a letter to the editor, who can I ask for help? Well, you can certainly reach out to us over at the Office of Public Affairs. You can send an email to mmccabe mmccabe@faseb.org, and she will be happy to help assist you or send your email along to anyone in our office who can help. Perhaps also reaching out to others who may have engaged in advocacy. Ask around in your own lab, or perhaps in maybe a membership group that you're a part of. Has anyone met with a member of Congress before or participated in advocacy? Do you have some best tips? So you can crowdsource on Facebook or Twitter for that kind of information as well too. If you have a stumbling block that we haven't addressed as part of this webinar, we encourage you to contact us offline and explain to us what that stumbling block might be. There may be a situation that we haven't considered or we haven't yet run into. Waiting for a few other questions are popping up here. When you connect with a member of Congress on Twitter, does it really have any impact whatsoever, or is it just contributing to additional noise? Sometimes Twitter is not the best source of scientific discourse. A good point. We've been keeping an eye on members of Congress's Twitter feeds for a while now, and actually learning a lot from some of our member societies who have been more engaged with their members of Congress in Twitter than we have. I think it's important to note that yes, Twitter can be sometimes not the best source of information or way to engage, but it is also a way to share information. Sometimes Twitter can be really helpful in just giving people information, addressing myths about science issues or scientific principles. So we do know that members of Congress and their staff are paying attention to what's showing up on their Twitter feeds. It's easy, of course, there's some trolls that show up there who aren't real people, and they're looking out for that. But you can certainly get a point across, and one way to really share information with your members of Congress is on Twitter. Most of the resources that we have at FASEB are available in electronic format. So if nothing else, you can tweet a link, for example, to the district fact sheet, which is another way to get that in front of a member of Congress's face or a key staff aide. We have actually already gone ahead and sent copies of those fact sheets to each congressional office, but we do not have a good way of knowing whether or not anyone is paying attention. So we do need more ways to get the word out, and Twitter is one way to do that. You mentioned the NIH funding increase, and you said that it would completely restore funding that was cut due to sequestration. But what we really need is actually much more than that. Is there any way to talk about a funding increase in this current fiscal environment? As I noted that the 1.8% increase for NIH would completely replace the funding that was lost due to sequestration, but we have to acknowledge that it would not in any way really provide NIH and the scientific community with what they need. We need to grow the NIH budget. So it is connecting with your members of Congress now to explain the importance of steady, sustained research is something that we could really use your help with. I personally believe we're starting to make some progress in that. I think the sequestration cuts were very difficult for everybody. Some of you may have noticed that there were a lot of articles in the newspaper around the time of sequestration. NIH was certainly cited last year during the government shutdown as one of the bad things that happens when you shut down the government and you can't do biomedical research. So we need to use this time to start not only thanking and encouraging members of Congress to at least provide the minimal increase that has been suggested this year, but to get the NIH budget back on a more stable trajectory. And I think one thing that will help with that is if members or individuals in the scientific community can talk about research that has stalled or has not moved forward as quickly because of the budget cuts or because it's so hard to get an NIH grant. If you're a younger researcher or a postdoc and you are at the beginning of your career and things look pretty bleak, either because you see the writing on the wall or maybe your PI has actually told you that your career has looked bleak, be sure to use this as a time to tell your story about what it means. And you can start from the beginning, why you got into science, what particular area of research you're working on and why that interests you. One thing that will be very helpful would be to really connect your research back to a particular disease or an issue that's in the news today. The National Public Radio, NPR, in the last couple weeks ran a series of very interesting pieces about the state of research funding in the United States these days, how we're losing ground to foreign competitors, how younger researchers are having a much harder time getting their careers started. If you haven't seen those, I absolutely recommend you look into that, and while you're at it, tweet it to tweet the link to your member of Congress who may have missed it because he or she is on the campaign trail. We are out of questions that have been submitted ahead of time, so if anyone has anything else that they would like to share now or to raise now, please go ahead and do so. Again, we do encourage you to check out these resources that are available on FASEB's website. Let us know if there's something missing or something that you need or need help encountering a difficult situation. We try and respond to all inquiries as quickly as possible, especially after this webinar today. The other thing we would ask that you do is for folks who were not able to participate today, please share this information with them. We will be sending a follow-up email to everybody who joined us today, and that follow-up email will include a copy of these slides. We will also be posting these online. Please feel free to share these with other interested parties, or if you have an opportunity to speak to a group on your campus or your postdoc association, feel free to use this presentation, quite frankly, because we would like to see more people engaged and more people involved. So thanks for everyone for your participation. We really appreciate that, and we hope that you will continue to reach out to us and let us know how we can be of assistance. Just before we conclude, I wanted to make sure that you have both the Office of Public Affairs website, and then if you have a question that you'd like to submit to us or like to speak with us offline, please go to opa@faseb.org, and we will be happy to get back to you. There's one last question that's come in as we were getting ready to end this email. Please tell me again how to find our representatives and senators' voting records. There are two ways to do that. You can go to www.house.gov or www.senate.gov and look for the voting tab or the voting bar, and you can go in there. You can also check your member of Congress's website or Twitter or Facebook page, and they often link to votes there. If there's a particular vote that you're interested, let's say on the budget, and you're not sure how to find that, you can contact us at opa@faseb.org, and we can share with you any information about how to find your member of Congress's specific voting record. And then, one more question. I was a postdoc in a different state than the one I am now, starting a faculty position as assistant professor. How much leverage would I have within my new elected official when I didn't vote for him or her? Could I reach for both members, the one for whom I voted in the past when I was a postdoc and the one who's my current elected official? How should I do that? These are wonderful questions. In terms of how much leverage you have with your new elected officials when you didn't vote for him or her, you don't actually have to tell them that you didn't vote for him or her. That's almost irrelevant at this point. If you've recently taken up a position at a specific research institution and you are living and or working in that district, you're a voter. You're a constituent of that member of Congress. So you can introduce yourself. You can explain that you recently moved to the district or to that local area and that you're making a home there and you're taking a new job. You can also reach out to your member of Congress in the state or city where you were a postdoc. You did your training there. You lived in that area. So it's absolutely appropriate to reach for both. You may have more success with your current elected official simply because you probably now have an address that is in their district. But I do encourage you to reach out for both. And you can again, if you reach out to the former elected official where you used to live, you can note that you've moved on to the university of wherever, but that you'd still like to maintain a relationship with that official because you did your training there. And there are probably others in that town or that university who are still in training programs and need the member of Congress to be supportive of research. A few more questions, and then since we still have time, I will go ahead and take them. It would be helpful if you could catalog or list budget and other important votes so that we can more easily research voting records. That is a very interesting suggestion and certainly one that we can consider. As a 501c3 nonprofit, FASEB does have some restrictions on how they can present this information, but we can certainly consult with some experts on this issue and consider putting together a voting guide or at least a better resource to help you research the key votes that are important to the NIH budget. Will you include the questions asked and the appropriate answers in the follow-up email to us? We can go ahead and certainly consider doing that. We'll have to check with the mechanics of Join Me to see if we can get an archive of these questions. If not, we can probably certainly put together some additional sort of talking points and Q&A that we can include in the follow-up email. Finally, aside from the information about federal spending on local research, is there any place where we can find information about the effect of this spending on local private sector growth? And the FASEB has put together a series of state fact sheets. Those are specific to NIH funding, but each of those fact sheets, which are available on that website with the map graphic, does include some information about the effect of research spending on local private sector growth. So for example, patents, jobs in the private biomedical research sector, startup information as well. I do suggest too, if you're looking for that information, you don't find it on the FASEB website, you might look at your, if you work in a university or a research institution, your Office of Public Affairs, the annual report for most universities these days includes some information about the local effect of university research dollars. There's some other resources as well, like the Battelle Institute, which you can just Google. I think it's battelle.org. Has published a couple of reports about the impact of jobs in the biomedical research field and how that trickles down. So this is information that you can find on the web. If there are no more questions, we will go ahead and wrap up a little bit early today and let folks get back to lunch. Thank you again for participating in this webinar. And if you have questions that we did not get to or that you think of afterwards, feel free to submit them to opa@faseb.org. Thanks, everybody.